Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Christopher Wood. I'm the Executive Director of LGBT Tech. If you've been following the series, you have been here before or you've watched it online. Thank you so much for coming again. I think this is a really important topic, and I think we have some really great speakers here today from all different backgrounds with a lot of expertise. So thanks for being here. We are live broadcasting, so if you do speak today, your voice will be broadcast. I just want to make sure that that's clear. And that there's also, there are two cameras going in the room, one in the back and one on the side, so just so you're aware. If you're tweeting about anything today, the hashtag is movingfwd. It's up here on the screens. We've also included the organization handles here, but I know each individual here, I think mostly has a Twitter handle. Probably wouldn't be that hard to find. Feel free to tweet at any of those. Probably get a better response with the organizations, but either way, it's up to you. I'm going to start by just saying this was a topic that came up that I think we really feel, both HTTP and LGBT Tech feel, is something we should really be paying attention to for multiple reasons, which our panelists will get into, and which is why we wanted to bring this conversation to the forefront. With our other speaker series panelists last year, we got into privacy and data, and I think the reason that this topic becomes so important is because the census touches a lot of those areas that impact minority communities. So it's almost bringing this all together. I'm going to start by introducing a couple of our panelists, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague Rosa. First, I'd like to introduce Marie Dautruche. Dautruche, sorry, I knew I was going to mess it up. I always mess up one. And then Raul Censureros, I always mess it up. This is the nerves talking. Thank you very much for all being here. I'll turn it over to Rosa, and thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. As Chris mentioned, we hope that you find our event helpful and that you're able to take with you some tangible advice. I have the pleasure of introducing Sam McClure, and she is the Senior Vice President with National LGBT Tech, Chamber of Commerce, and Terry Minnis. She is with Asian Americans Advancing Justice. Thank you so much for joining us, and please enlighten us.
Okay, wow, look at that. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maria Dautruche. I am the Vice President of Partnerships and Advancement at the National Urban League, and I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you, Rosa, for the invitation, which I tried to decline, and so I appreciate your persistence and your real amplification of this issue. I think because we share that, I could not actually decline. But just in case Rosa ever invites you anywhere, it's not an invitation, it is a mandate. Okay. And so now I will try to operate two things at once, which is always fun to watch. What? Did I do it? Yes, I did. Bam, look at that. So my quick overview of the census here is not going to be anything innovative other than what you could actually find on the census's website. It is an amazing website. I'm not just saying that because census staff are here. I'm saying that because it's actually very true. But what I will do is offer a little insight to putting the 2020 census in some context. For me, as a student of history, I'll put in some historical context, and I think that'll help you understand just why it is so important, why we do it, and why it really matters to get out the count in your communities in 2020. So the Constitution calls for a census, not because it's just fun to count people and know how many of things you have, but because we use that count to distribute funding and also to get our representatives in Congress. And so just want to quickly, because I don't know how many times you get the opportunity to read the Constitution in your daily life, but since I have your attention, I will do so. This is from Article 1, Section 2 of the United States Constitution as it was written in 1787. So for a brief moment, we're not in this gorgeous room. We're not in this amazing atmosphere with all these diverse people around us. Let's pretend we're any one of the founding fathers. So pick your favorite wealthy, white, educated man of the era and be that person for a moment. And so they've decided, we the people, they, those people in that room, right? Decided that representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states. We know there were not 50 at the time. We're all in that time, right? Which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers. Goes on to say that these numbers are of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, which is very different than those excluding Indians not taxed, and 3/5 of all other persons. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of Congress of the United States, and then within every subsequent term of 10 years, in such manner as they shall by law direct. So, written in 1787, we know from this the first census was in 1790. They were counting numbers of free persons, including those that were indentured servants. And for those who were not, there were two classes that were identified in this: Indians not taxed, and that would be our American Indians, indigenous populations, and 3/5 of all other persons, which, if we open our eyes back into 2018, it'll be like 3/5 of me, my friend Nicole, you know, those that were enslaved during that time. And as we know, things change. And one thing I want to keep in mind as we talk about amendments to the Constitution, changes, and how those changes happen and make impact, think about things that all consistently seem to bring about change. So 1787, we just come out of the American Revolution. 1868, we've come out of the Civil War. Representatives now shall be apportioned among the states, several states, according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state, excluding Indians not taxed. So, just to put that in historical context, how something can happen in one context and over a period of time, due to a number of societal environmental changes, we have to amend what we originally thought. And what we originally thought was that blacks could be 3/5 a person. All of a sudden, indentured servants are missing. They're now just whole people. And it goes on to talk about voting rights after that in the 14th Amendment. But anytime someone says we're upholding the Constitution, these are one of our laws, I just highly recommend you check up on that and get a sense for yourself what was going on in that context. So early on in 1810, I found this lovely image of a census form from 1810, which is amazing because history is great. And you can see that the forms change. So in 1810, you're collecting the name of a head of household who is most likely a white free man. And then you're just counting. Oh, it's doing things I didn't want it to do. What? Okay, I'm going to give that time. And then you are literally just counting other people as ascribed, as mandated for the count. Another thing to keep in mind is we are used to the adage of you get the form, fill it out, send it back. That's not how this was working. U.S. Marshals were conducting the census at this time. So someone would come to you and do a count of who was in your household. And those people's names were not given, and there was specific information they just wanted to find out about the population who's in your household. At about 1820, fascinating things are happening. There's been another war. Anyone know which war happened between 1810 and 1820? War of 1812. Way to go, you guys. I'm sure your global studies teachers and social studies teachers are so proud. So the War of 1812 makes a big difference for our nation's demographic and our nation's very geography because the United States grew tremendously. We got a whole bunch of land from Spain, which is basically Mexico. And so what I think is funny is when you ask certain people in certain parts of the country, oh, when did your people cross the border? Appropriate answer, when did the border cross us? Better question. So so the border did cross them as they became part of the United States, and we, the United States, got most of California, Nevada, Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, most of Texas. Huge swath of the American geography. So the 1820 census, I think this is very fascinating, is the first time in the census taking that there's a question asked for the number of foreigners that are not naturalized in the house. And we can tell why because we've put that in context. 1840 is interesting as well when you think about what we want to know about people. In 1830, you see the first request for a sense of who in the house or who in the living situation has some kind of impairment or special ability. So being blind, deaf, dumb is the actual language used at the time. I do not, in my everyday life, call these people blind, deaf, or dumb. Definitely not the dumb. Also asks about insanity and idiotic. Like, is the person idiotic or insane? That doesn't become a big deal really until a big controversy in 1840. Someone puts out a report after census data is released saying it is clear that blacks living in non-slaveholding states are more insane and idiotic than those in slaveholding states. Therefore, we want to make the claim that slavery is better for black people. 1840, what's going on socially and culturally. We're all kind of waking up and saying this practice of enslavement is really barbaric and ridiculous. We should stop it. And so people are using our data to make their arguments. We've been doing this for years. You make an argument, you have data to back you up. My favorite saying about data, because I love math and I love data, is that numbers don't lie. It's we do. We lie. We make stories up based on those numbers that serve our purposes. But the census itself isn't necessarily lying. This is the numbers we have. A whole lot of things happened between 1840 and 1990. I do not mean to mitigate them, especially as it relates to Native American populations, especially as it relates to how we're thinking about citizenship as a country. Several acts of Congress around naturalization, nationality, citizenship, all happening during this time. The Dred Scott case was a big case that's actually tied to the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924, which in 1924 did make about 125 to 300,000 indigenous people citizens. So all this time before, they weren't really being counted. And now after 1940, there's an opportunity to work with tribal lands and governments to do a census count, which will be very important for this count as it has been in many others. And another big deal is like we're finally starting to look like all 50 states. America started out as a colony. America participated in colonial activity. We got Alaska, Hawaii, our territories. All those people need to be counted now. And we see the complexity of the census operation adapting to these demographic changes and historical events. But in 1990 in particular, it was the first census to designate Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islanders. 1990 was the first time we got around to that, so good for us, late but not lost. In 2000, and I've added a graphic there of the one of the questions on the 2000 questionnaire. This was another year of a little bit of controversy. So there's an opportunity to name a person in your household who is not related to you but might be your unmarried partner. And there was a lot of advocacy around getting us to finally marriage equality. And so there were a lot of issues about, well, is this really counting my relative married person if we're not legally married? A whole lot of controversy around it. 2000 census did have other controversies around readjustment, around what happened in Utah. Feel free to look these things up. They're just interesting factoids if one day you end up on Jeopardy. And so that was a seed planted there. And then in 2010, big change again. Rather than getting these long questions, these long forms, people got a 10 questionnaire short form. Part of that was to handle what was going on around decline in response rate. And because of that short form, male participation was about 72 to 74% of the population. After that, enumerators were sent out to do follow-up. I was one of those enumerators. Another fun factoid about 2010, Census had an amazing workforce to pick from for temporary enumerators. Many of us, like myself and some of my colleagues in my community, I just lost our jobs in 2009. So we were like, oh, Census is hiring, and all I have to do is take a test, get sworn in, get some temp work. This is amazing. And so we did that, and it was a really interesting way to participate in my community, to get to know more about how the census process works. I counted a lot of group homes, counted the homeless, and that's an interesting count process. Also, an interesting thing about 2010 is though it was an expensive census. They somehow, I believe, came in a little under budget. And that's because they targeted their advertising in places where people had not responded. The mail response rate was fairly high, it was a good rate considering how low responses had been to other surveys conducted at the time. And census enumerators could question neighbors and reliable third parties, reducing the follow up cost of having someone come to your door every time you weren't there or didn't answer or didn't complete. Interesting process, but it got it done. Nevertheless, still super expensive, especially when you consider what it had been over time. But again, growing population, changing demographics, more diverse, more complex. And we use the census data for so much at a neighborhood, state based level that there was a bigger demand for more accurate local information. So it's a huge undertaking. I don't want anyone to leave this room thinking it's this bean counting activity that the government spends too much on. This is the baseline data for our power. It's our power grid. How you are represented politically, how you are empowered economically is all based on accurate census data. So it's critical, and it's a very easy way to participate in our civic democracy. So here we have a map, and I love maps as well, but I did not bombard you with them in case you don't. There's actually at the CUNY Graduate Center website all these interactive maps because they're a partner with the census on letting people use census data and get information about how this data is used. So here we have a map static, even though on the website it's dynamic and interactive, where you can search by your congressional district what your mail return rate was. And then they've overlaid on it by these green diamonds places where households are experiencing inadequate internet connectivity. This is critical because the 2020 census will be a push to respond online. So if you know that, let's take an area that's super red, like let's look down there at the bottom of Texas. So we have a lot of red, dark red spaces, these green diamonds all lined up in a row down there. We know that's an area that we're going to have to invest some dollars to get a good count. What's not highlighted here, because this is a static image, is how even in the lighter shaded regions, take Ohio for instance, when you zoom in, you do get some places, especially in urban areas around, say, Columbus, for instance, where response rate is just super low. Um, and so there is going to have to be this very strategic, targeted approach to communications, to partnership, and to mobilizing a distrustful, hard to count population. So Census has a plan. I won't get too deep into it, even though it's pretty amazing as a new operational plan. Oftentimes, when I'm told to spend less on something, I just do less. And yet, Census has been told to spend less and do tremendously more. So this is the operational plan they've come up with. And they're actually testing this right now in Providence County, Rhode Island. Due to funding restraints, normally Census does 3 end-to-end tests. Those are like your dress rehearsals. But due to funding restraints, they were not able to complete all 3. They just focused in Providence County, Rhode Island, which is a pretty good county to try to get a sense for what the makeup of the country looks like. So first, they establish where to count. They check records. They do address canvassing ahead of time. Some of it's done in office. Some of it's done with geospatial aerial imagery. It's because, communities change over a decade. From the time I left New York and would walk down 125th Street to the time I returned to New York after college and working here in DC, um, the block of 125th between like Lenox and 6th is different. It's just a different block. Different people live there, different amenities are needed. I would not want to base my allocation to that community based on data 10 years ago. I'd want up to date data. So then the big thing is to motivate people to respond. That's where a lot of us are going to come into the conversation as partners to Census and just as advocates for our community, honestly. Then you're going to count the population. You see there an expectation that most people will go to the internet to respond. There'll be some telephone and follow up by mail, but then there will still have to be some enumerator follow up. The key to enumerator follow up is it's effective, it's also very expensive. So that is what I've heard to be the highest bucket in that rising cost, is getting all those enumerators out there when so many people don't respond. And then they're going to release census results, which we don't play a big part in, but we should be paying attention to. We should all be excited to, or at least interested in knowing how our community is changing, how our country is changing. Um, Demographic results out of 2010 were really, really fascinating. And I will leave it to other experts to talk more about this process. Um, so I'm at the National Urban League. We are a historic civil rights organization, and we are a longtime partner with the Census Bureau on getting a fair, accurate, and full, complete count. It matters to us because we rely on that data to do our work in 300 communities around the country through our 90 affiliates and sites around the country. We serve about 2 million people a year. We serve them with education programs. We serve them with workforce development, affordable housing, and mortgage counseling. We also do entrepreneurship centers in 13 markets across the country, and we produce reports just like we've produced our State of Black America report this week. We've launched that. We rely on the data, and we know the data is important, as we said, for representation and economic empowerment. So we're committed to doing whatever we can to get a full, fair, and accurate count, especially given that our community, African American communities and urban communities with transient populations of renters, et cetera, tend to be undercounted and also tend to be highly distrustful of the government and therefore not respond to census. This is our leader, Mark Morial. He's a former mayor, comes with a lot of experience and knowledge about what it takes to get a city going, get people mobilized, run a campaign, for example, and also run a city. And so we're privileged to have him at the helm of our organization. And in 2010, he was actually the chair of the Census Bureau's National Advisory Committee on Race and Ethnicity. He's an awesome convener, and so is the National Urban League. Just around 2020 census, like I said, we've been a partner for years, but just focusing on this upcoming decennial count, he has already convened a 2020 Census Black Roundtable, co-convened by the National Coalition of Black Civic Participation, led by Melanie Campbell. He has also brought this census issue up to members of the Congressional Black Caucus. He has mobilized civil rights leaders in partnership with the United States Conference of Mayors. He's active in the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And I am going to take a little credit for this bottom picture here of these beautiful people because at our annual conference, which took place last summer in St. Louis and will take place this year in the summer in Columbus, Ohio. But last year in St. Louis, I helped to organize a panel of leaders from various organizations, intentionally from various racial groups. So we have John Yang there from Asian Americans Advancing Justice, Melanie Campbell again from Black Civic Participation. Skip over Maya Wiley, though she's amazing. She's the co-founder of Center for Social Inclusion and is currently at the New School for Social Research. Ed Teporn from Asian Pacific Islander American Health Forum, and our moderator was Byron Pitts. Missing is Brent Wilkes from LULAC. And we just had a conversation about the power of multiracial coalitions. And without instruction, the panel focused on census and how this is the issue we can mobilize around. This is just more examples of our power to communicate and amplify. This I'm very proud of, and I hope Raul or his team can speak to, but also got to be a part of a Census Solutions workshop as a partner in Rhode Island. And I want to focus on what you can do now. A lot about what census is, putting it in context, what can you do? I'm going to go ahead and trademark this today. Don't use it without paying me. Be an actor. And what that means is be an advocate, be committed to complete this, tell a friend, and organize. You now have some information. You can advocate and agitate around that information to your own Congress people. There's going to be a controversial, in some spaces, citizenship question added to the census. There is still time to tell your congressperson how you feel about that. There's also time to advocate for increased funding for the census. And there's still time to advocate for an actual census director. The census has been without a director in place for over a year now. Commit to complete yourself. I can't tell you what to do, but I strongly urge you to just complete your census form online when you receive the information in the mail. Check your mail, it's not a bill. It's going to help you actually get more funding for your community appropriately allocated. Tell a friend or 5 or 20, have a meeting, have a book club, have a brunch, I don't know, share the word, and then organize. All but 2 states in the United States have compiled or filed interest in forming complete count committees. These are statewide coalitions of folks who are committed to getting an accurate count for the state. But you can push your mayor, you can push your city council person, you can push your county executive, you can organize locally as well as at the state level, and you can also connect with organizations that have affiliates like the National Urban League, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, NAACP, your local fraternity or sorority, your local house of worship. Anywhere you are with 3 or 4 other people, you all can be organized with a message. So that is more than my time, and I thank you for being gracious with that. Um, and I'll leave you with that.
Thank you very much for that overview. Turn it over to Raul.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay, yes. Well, good afternoon, and thank you to HTTP and LGBT Tech for inviting us here today. We're delighted, Census Bureau, and I'm delighted to be here with my fellow panelists. Maria, thank you for being a census enumerator in 2010. It's a very important civic activity that you undertook on behalf of the nation, so we appreciate that. And also, just to reiterate, that we thank the National Urban Leagues and National Partnership, a partnership for us in the census. We had about 250,000 partners in 2010. About 1,000 of them were national partners, national organizations, but our partners did so much work for us, all the way from the Fortune 500 companies down to the local chambers of commerce, local NGO, local houses of worship, all together helped us get the word out about the importance of the census. So I will just highlight some things in addition to what Maria talked about. But the census helps determine how more than $675 billion a year in federal funding is distributed. And that's going to be distributed based on where the population is. So that's why it's very important that we have an accurate count and that we count people in the right place. Also, Maria talked about a new innovation, online response. That's very significant. It's the first time we've done that. In addition to that, it's the first time the public's going to be able to respond via phone as well. So that is a first. And for the tried and true method, somebody still wants to do that paper form, they can do that as well. I'll tell you that since we're in a technology environment, of course, we're going to have strong security controls, cybersecurity controls to make sure that the information is secure that the public provides. Our standards are established by the National Institutes of Standard and Technology, so this is something very important to us. From an innovation standpoint, so with this online response instrument, it'll be in English plus 12 non-English languages. So you'll be able to respond in 12 other non-English languages online. Also via phone, you'll be able to respond in 12 non-English languages. The questionnaire will be bilingual. And sent in a bilingual form in those parts of the country where there's a lot of Spanish spoken. The census workers that will follow up on households that do not reply will be able to have a script so they can interact with that person in Spanish. So I will also have language guides in 59 languages. So this is the effort to make sure we count everybody. And just as we did in 2010, I was actively involved in the advertising campaign in 2010. We're going to have a very robust and extensive advertising and communications campaign in the 2020 census. And of course, digital media will play an important part, of course, because more people are mobile and that's how they're communicating. And we'll want to make sure we engage them and encourage them to participate. And you alluded to this, Maria, that of course the more people respond, then the less households we have to follow up on. That is where the cost of the census is following up on households that do not reply. Because again, we want to make sure we count everybody. So being that I'm in the national partnership space, I do want to acknowledge a couple of my colleagues that are here. Lorena Molina Irizarry also works in national partnership, and Claire Ross. And Lorena works with national partnerships in the technology space, so I thought it'd be nice to have her here. I will tell you that our national partners are extremely important, and in 2010, those partners did really incredible things for us, helped to, of course, engage their audiences, their trusted voices. Partners are because they can connect with folks, particularly at the local level. Partners provided space for training for free. That was hugely valuable. Of course, they put information out in newsletters. Some put out national retailers put advertisements in their Sunday circulars. They also help with recruitment, and I'll just mention that's going to be really, really important. We're going to recruit about 2.5 million people and hire somewhere between 400 and 500,000 people. So partners helped us with that, get the word out. So also very important. We're looking at being very collaborative and innovative as how we're engaging partners this go around. Maria talked about the Census Solution Workshop that we had in Providence, and this is an event where we bring organizations together, national, local organizations, and they talk about. We ideate. We talk about addressing a particular challenge, how we would address that challenge that we're going to have with the census, and then devise solutions, and then make commitments. So we had a series of events last year. We're doing additional events this year. So I'm happy to tell you more about that. And just going forward, for anybody that would like to join us as a partner, happy to talk to you. Lorena, Claire, and I can do that. And if there's a local aspect to your work, happy to connect you at the local level, because our local partnership efforts are very important. We're going to hire about 1,000 partnership specialists all over the country, and they're going to be engaging all those organizations. So I'll just leave you with that. Happy to answer any questions. But again, I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We're going to have the other panelists start to join in and kind of respond based on the work that both Sam and Terry do in this space. So whichever one would like to go and start first.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. And as was mentioned before, I'm a senior vice president at the National LGBT Chamber of Commerce. And today I will add to my title, actor. Love that. Or else I owe you some money now. I regret that suddenly. But no, I thought that was so interesting, and to have it be something memorable. Indeed, in order for us to have a high quality, valuable census, it does require a level of civic engagement that I think is a little beyond what folks expect. And I learned so much just now from both of you. I'm really excited to pick up all that information, as I know our audience is as well. It's also interesting to me to see the evolution of the census over time, where corrections have been made, and I think that's really important. And I would say candidly, I think the census has a long way to go to continue to correct, and particular vulnerability for LGBTQ people being radically undercounted in the general census for a lot of reasons. And I think one of them comes down to just not acknowledging that LGBTQ is an identity. It's not a prescription about relationships. So if the count only involves marriages or even partnerships, it's likely to be a radical undercount. And no other American citizen is counted only if they're married. So, because a lot of people just don't get married, just as some people don't have children. So I think it's a really important thing for everyone to think about. And I want to bring another element into the conversation, which actually may be valuable to you as well, I would assume, and that's the economic census. We could have a whole nother really informative deck, and I suspect you're the expert, so I'm not going to put that I'm the expert at all. But one thing I do know about the economic census is, in order for incredibly valuable business development programs, entrepreneurial nurturing activities to exist, they have to be funded. And in order for them to be funded, the data has to exist that says the community to which this advocacy will go, in fact, exists. It's really that simple. And there are significant omissions in the economic census today that need to be changed. And I will say I love talking with you and your colleagues before we started. And I could tell that we're all of like mind that these changes do, in fact, need to be made. One of those omissions is entrepreneurs who are LGBTQ people or people with disabilities. And I would just say candidly, and as a professional business advocate, I think it's kind of ridiculous to assume or even let it be known out there in any particular factual data space that these people don't exist. We have at the NGLCC produced historic report that actually tracks the economic impact of LGBT entrepreneurs. And if you're interested in that report, it's pretty easy to find on our website, which is just nglcc.org/report. And it's that simple. This report showed that based on the available data, which is all data that we've collected ourselves, we know that there's an estimated 1.4 million businesses out there that are owned by LGBTQ people. We actually, at our organization, created a business certification so that if a business is at least 51% owned, operated, managed, and controlled by a person who's LGBT, there's a certification process, just as you certify a minority-owned business or a woman-owned business, or now a business owned by a person with disability. That certification is out there as well. At the time we did this research study, we had 909 certified LGBT business enterprises, so we could use that one controlled data set. And we found that just that 909 businesses created 33,000 jobs. And if you think about that for a minute, that is quite a powerful economic force. We looked at average years in business, which is a really important kind of barometer for the overall health of an economic segment. And now keep in mind that the average small business in America fails between 2 and 5 years generally. That's a high percentage of failure at that time, which drives me crazy. I lay awake at night trying to figure out how to change that. But in this group that we looked at, the average years in business was 12 years. So not only was it a force of job creation, it was also a force of stability. And the interesting thing about LGBT-owned businesses and businesses owned by people with disabilities is that these are diverse segments that actually contain every other as well. So increasing counts of these two diverse segments would increase the accuracy of all counting, because as we know in this beautiful country that we live in, which is still a bit of a lab, lately it's a lab that seems like it needs more work, which is alarming. I know many of you are feeling that pressure as well. But in this beautiful nation, identity is complex and it is multi-layered. And if we don't treat people as whole, that means acknowledging all of the things that make them who they are. We're actually missing big pieces of information that are incredibly relevant to not only the strength of our democracy, but the actual functionality of our economy. The way our system works, it will fail if any one set of people are locked out. I think this is true not only for LGBTQ people and people with disabilities, but also for first-generation Americans, immigrants, all kinds of people who are being not only undercounted, but then, because of the undercount, undersupported, underfunded for the economic advancement and the contributions that they could be making to our economy. So I won't go on and on about this because I can. This is one of my favorite topics. But I just want to leave you with that thought. People shouldn't have to just work so hard to prove they exist. These people do exist. They should be counted. And when we're talking about economic advancement, which is sort of my specialty, which is a civil rights issue, I believe, and one that's modeled from great histories of advancements in this country. If we're doing inclusion for economic advancement and we leave anyone behind, we're not really doing it. So when I fight for LGBTQ people, I fight for people with disabilities. I fight for vets, because we can't leave anybody out. There's enough room at the economic table for everyone. And frankly, the more people that are at that table, the more revenue and productivity will be on that table for everyone. And I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to take questions later on.
Thank you. Please, Terry.
Thank you. So I am Terry Minnis, and Director of Census and Voting Programs at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC. We are a 501c3 national nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and our mission is to protect and advance the human and civil rights of Asian Americans, but also to build a fair and equitable society for all. Echoing my colleague's statements, we do really see the work as lifting all boats up, right? And then doing that ensures that we have a healthy country, a healthy democracy, and a healthy society. We have been very active. We maintain a what I call permanent census program all decade long. While we do engage in the outreach and educational work that we're all facing right now, as we ramp up towards the actual taking of a census, we also think it's very important to be at the table and be a part of the conversations as decisions are being made about how to take the census, what's going to be on the census, what questions are going to be asked, how questions are asked. These are really critical components of how well a census can be taken. And if you don't engage until the 8 or 9 year, these decisions have been made, and you really have to go with what you have, and you won't be able to weigh in. And oftentimes, without having those different perspectives and different um, voices at the table, there might be things that just aren't considered because you don't have that perspective. So we think that it's very critical to be a part of those discussions. At the same time, we have also been a national partner to the Census Bureau, and we do think it's equally important to make sure that we're out there getting the word out about how important the census is for everybody, right? Federal funding has been mentioned, reapportionment has been mentioned, redistricting for the reapportionment and at the state and local levels, right? If the data is incorrect or is not appropriately representative, then your districts won't be, your representation in Congress won't be. And so this is part of why this work is so critical. But as also has been mentioned, the reality is the census is not a perfect count. As hard as we all work to make it a perfect count, it is something where people will be and have been missed in the past. And perhaps that wouldn't be as big of an issue if everybody got missed at the same rates, because then proportionally everything would shake out the same way. But what we know is that different groups get missed at different rates, right? So some of the communities that have historically had the highest levels of undercount include African American men between the ages of 19 and 40, young children under 5, all young children, but particularly Latino and African American children, American Indians on reservations. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have also been undercounted. And even though the last census in the aggregate shows a national accurate count, if you will, of Asian Americans, the reality is we know at the local levels that's not necessarily what our communities are seeing. And so, the importance of undercount can't be overstated, because these consequences will last throughout the entire decade, right, until the next census. And not only does it impact, say, the federal funding level for year one, it's going to impact it for the entire decade. It's going to impact the other surveys that the Census Bureau takes. It'll impact the analysis and data sets created by other government agencies, by businesses, and so forth, because the census is often, if not always, the foundation of those other activities. And so if you have a bad count, then that is a ripple effect that that is both wide and deep, as I like to think about. Well, I don't actually like to think about it, but how I tend to think about that. And so I think that is one of the things that we are certainly looking at. And right now, we know every decade we have people who are more disinclined to participate for a variety of reasons. It could be, that they are weary of the federal government. They are weary of just engaging with the federal government. Unfortunately, today we are in a unique situation where all of those concerns and fears have been heightened. We know that we are currently in a fairly toxic environment where there are a lot of anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim, just kind of anti-other sentiments that are abound. And with that, we know that families, community members are fearful of engaging with society at large. And before we even get to the census, right? We have heard stories of, for example, immigrant families deciding that they can't go to church because they're fearful of being out in that space, right? That families are having their children either not go to school or not participate in after school activities, in part because they're fearful of having and being out in that public space. And so if they're having issues with day-to-day activities and being fearful of engaging in day-to-day activities, we know that it's going to be difficult to convince them that they should fill out their census forms, because they will have questions about, well, how is this data going to be used? How are my responses going to be used? Am I going to be targeted? So while we've always played that role, I think we have to recognize that it is a much steeper climb this time for us to convince people to participate. And now it's been made more difficult. Maria had mentioned the citizenship question, and we know that this is a new a new development that is really going to have reverberating effects on our ability to engage people and have them participate. So at the end of last year, the Department of Justice sent a letter over to the Census Bureau requesting that a citizenship question be added to the 2020 census form. Secretary Ross had undertaken a review process, and at the end or on March 26th, May had announced his decision that a citizenship question would in fact be added to the census form. Mind you, this is a question that has not actually been tested for the census in the census environment. So he is adding a untested question that is apparently going to be slapped onto the end of the census form, not the form that was tested in Rhode Island, right? So the end-to-end test that my colleagues have talked about had a census questionnaire that did not include this question. And as I'm sure many of you have seen, whether it's been through media coverage or even hearing it from your community groups or partners or family, friends, everyone is very concerned. What does this mean? Why is this being added? What is this going to be used for? So I think our job, of course, is to help explain the confidentiality protections that the census data are under, right? Title 13 is the strongest protection that exists. But we know it's going to take more than just that. This is going to take a lot of work. National partnerships, I think, will certainly be important parts. The local partnerships are going to be important in being able to try to explain what is going on. I do want to be very clear for our organization, Advancing